My husband and I have been married for 7 years and we have a 6-year-old son and 1-year-old daughter. My husband came here from Iran 10 years ago. I was born and raised in the US, but I'd been to Iran twice during my childhood. We went to Iran 8 weeks ago, and it was supposed to be 4 weeks long. My husband decided to stay until my son has to start school. I came back 4 weeks ago with my daughter. We were speaking today, and he was talking about how he doesn't want to come back to the U.S, specifically West Virginia. Just yet 8 months ago we made the move from Queens to West Virginia for my job. We were very comfortable in Queens, with lots of friends and family. Culture was alive, and everything felt homier. West Virginia is not the best, and my husband has had a really bad time adjusting. He doesn't like it here at all. He suggested that he and my son move back to Queens for now, while my daughter and I stay in West Virginia until next year. I just want everyone's thoughts on how to deal with this. Sometimes quality of life is more important, especially when you're living in a foreign country. No amount of money is worth feeling isolated or unwelcome all the time. You're worried about the state of your marriage if he moves back, but consider what will happen if you make him stay. You can work something out. It's not impossible. But consider what will happen if you make him stay. This is very true, especially if he felt forced to stay in a state that brings him nothing but unhappiness. Could it be that he is more of a target of xenophobia and racism in WV? My little sister is from Iran, and the time she had to study in Eastern Germany was the worst of her life because of all the hate she was getting from the natives. If your husband has to go through something like that all the time, I don't blame him for not wanting to live there. Could it be that he is more of a target of xenophobia and racism in WV? That's mainly what it is. From your comments, you plan to move back to Queens in 2024. I say you take this to a marriage counselor with the intent to figure out how you make a long distance marriage work for 2 years until you move back to Queens. Your husband and the kids should stay in Queens, and you should stay in the cheapest housing you can find in WV. Rent a room if you need to. Sock away as much money as you can, so it will feel worth it to have spent this time away from your family. Use your discretionary income and vacation time to go back home and visit them as often as you can. If you have the option to work remotely for a week at a time every so often, go stay with your family while you do that. I think this can work, but I think you should get professional guidance so you can make it as easy on yourselves as possible. Yes, we do. I'm going to bring this up with my husband when I call him. Unfortunately I don't, which sucks because when I was at my other department, I had the option to work remotely, but over here they require me to show up to the office. I don't understand this post. In the comments you seem completely supportive of his decision to stay in Iran and then move back to Queens, and you seem very opposed to everyone telling you to move out of WV or get a new job, even though you admittedly hate it there and plan to move out within a few years. Did you make this post just to complain about how much you dislike it there? What do you want us to say? There's a reason the pay is high, because no one wants to live there. He probably gets stared a lot and rightfully wonders if it's a safe place for him and your children. It must be really bad if he prefers to stay in Iran. Do you earn enough to maintain 2 households? Or live somewhere where the commute is long, but your husband doesn't have to worry about being the victim of a hate crime every day? My husband actually prefers Iran more than America in general, but Queens just reminds him more of home, which I agree. The concern isn't about where I'm going to live. I'm not moving back to Queens right now. I'm staying here, but where he's going to live and where my kids are going to live. He wants my son to live there with him since he's older and already started school over there. The main concern is, if he does move, how will it affect our marriage? I want my husband to be comfortable and happy, and living in WV doesn't give him that, but I wonder how can I prevent this possible move from putting a strain on us? It's probably racist afterward him, and he will never feel safe or welcome. Yes, it really is. Edit. I'm so confused as to why this is getting downvoted. Guys, it's no secret that WV is very racist, and we don't feel welcome here. Now onto my opinion/advice. Is there any way to start the transfer back to Queens citing familial strife due to the move? Maybe via FMLA. I don't know. My contract ends in 2023. He doesn't want me to quit my job. He just wants to go back to Queens. Wow. I don't blame him a bit. WV is *TERRIBLE*, and so incredibly racist. Your poor husband. Just let him go back to Queens, where he doesn't have to worry about getting shot by some redneck. Start looking for another job in Queens or a remote job. I'm sorry, one of your kids will end up spending at least part of the school year there. The school system is pathetic. They are so racist, it hurts. Oh, my daughter will never attend school here. Once 2024 hits, I'm out of here and back to Queens I go. My son already had to for this past school year, so if they do end up going back to Queens, it will be very comforting that he's in a good school district. Look, I'm so white I could blend into snow, redhead. Whiter than white. And you want to know how I remember the one stop I made in West Virginia once passing through? I have very dark brown eyes. The gas station cashier asked me back, quote, "You got any Indian in you? Native American for context?" And I said yes, thinking nothing of it. My ancestry is typical American mutt with Native American 2 gens back, and he spent the rest of the time I was checking out telling me how Indians ruined this country and should be forced to move to Canada. This was in 2008. As mentioned, I'm white. I can't imagine being of any other race or ethnicity in WV. Let him and the kids move back to Queens. I can't imagine a profession that would be worth moving from Queens to West Virginia. Colorado, Texas maybe, but West Virginia? Meth and Mountain Dew mouth, no thanks. Texas? My friends, white conservative, Baptist, moved from upstate New York, which is fairly conservative for a known liberal state, to the Waco area of Texas. They had a 2-year-old daughter who was adopted from the Middle East. They actually had people in Waco telling them to get the hell out and take their little terrorist with them. They didn't even last a year there. Can you imagine calling a 2-year-old a terrorist? You couldn't pay me enough to live in Texas. I don't really have advice here. Just want to throw in my 2 cents. I'd probably have the same thoughts as him. West Virginia is very low on places I'd want to live in the US. Especially coming from a very lively and diverse place like Queens with anything and everything a few blocks away, and all kinds of food. I know there is a large Middle Eastern population there as well, and I don't blame him for feeling more comfortable there than in some semi-backwards place like West Virginia. I'm not sure how much control you have over your situation. A good job is a good job, and I'd imagine it's not half bad if you were willing to move to West Virginia for it. Honestly, I'd refuse to move there as well. I'm a white passing Latino, so I personally wouldn't feel unsafe there, but I certainly wouldn't feel at home or near anything related to my culture. So your options are job and financial security, splitting your family up for over a year, your husband living where he is miserable, and your son possibly going to a bad school. Those are sucky options. I hope you can find a better located position solving everything. If not, create a pros and cons list with your husband. Maybe even try to put a number value on things to compare it to your salary more effectively. Quality of life is honestly important. And if there's anything the pandemic taught us is your mental health matters. I will say this, my parents did long distance for 5 years for work purposes. My dad traveled back every weekend or every other. They did it because it was a crazy good job and the retirement benefits were too good. They made it work. Was my dad tired? Yes. But they made it. I say that to say get a counselor, make a clear plan for how to navigate this. I would say, if the community is better in Queens, let your kids stay there. Travel back and forth, and see if you can do remote work on Fridays. You can do this, but your marriage won't survive years in WV, it sounds like. I don't blame him. I have several friends who are American, but whose parents are from the Middle East, one from Iran actually, and they have a hard time in particular areas of the US. My friend who is Iranian American was followed at gas stations and grocery stores when she lived in the middle of nowhere Midwest. She had enough of it and moved back to California. Honestly, I don't blame him. I moved from California, born and raised, to Alabama for a partner's job, and the relationship did not survive. I was miserable. Every single thing about that place was horrible, especially the people. Except for him, he was great. It just was not enough. And that was as a white straight woman. I can only imagine the experience of anyone in a minority or marginalized community. And I most definitely would absolutely never want to raise kids in the South. He's more wants to feel like he's in Iran between family and friends in Queens. Probably living in West Virginia makes him lonely and away from your culture. West Virginia in general isn't diverse. No wonder he doesn't want to live there, since he's from Iran and your children are Iranian as well. Queens is extremely diverse and that's why he felt comfortable. Your kids will also deal with more racism in WV than New York. Sounds like you may need to move. I think you'll be lucky if he comes back from Iran at all. No one should have to live in West Virginia. You had better get him and your son back to USA before he decides to stay in Iran. From what I've read, you could have a hard time getting your child back. How is your contract structured? Do you have exit penalties? Even with a contract they can't literally force you to work for them. I'd honestly just admit moving to WV didn't work out. Shocking. And find a job back in New York City. If there are monetary penalties for leaving your current place, you should write it into the offer of your new job that they pay for the penalties. Why don't all of you move to Queens now? To be fair, WV is horrible and Queens is awesome. You couldn't pay me enough to live in WV. As an American woman of mixed African ancestry, I'll say right now that the few times I've had to drive through West Virginia, I made sure to drive fast. That is not a place I like to spend any significant amount of time. Your husband has a good point, and for the sake of your family, you'd do well to respect his wishes not to make him return there. Why doesn't your husband want you to go back to Queens with him? Sorry, but I wouldn't feel comfortable in a Trump estate either. Can't blame him. Given the political craziness, I like to relocate to Canada, but I'm too old. They want young workers.